So, John, one of the things that I want to ask you is what are the kinds of mistakes that you see people make, freelancers or first time entrepreneurs that are leaving corporate life to set up by themselves? What kind of mistakes do they make when it comes to pricing their services, their service offering? And what's the kind of, what's the best and the worst that you've seen kind of thing? How should they go about pricing for their services?
It's a really, really good question, Andrew. I think the first thing to say is that most people I've spoken with, given coaching advice to, who've come out of a corporate role, the first thing is they have very little idea about how to either frame their product or service, and then how to price different elements of it or the whole service in itself. So I think the first piece is having absolute clarity around what it is somebody is doing, who they are serving, and what type of problem they're solving, which means someone would want to come to them. And that's very important, because if you don't understand that piece, it's very hard to know what the value or cost is. And it's almost certainly not a cost per minute or per hour or per day. It's the value you can inject or help either help improve the revenues of a business with some direct causal connection. So by me doing this, I will help the revenues improve by this different amount, or enabling the business to save money by doing something, or avoiding problems, or having a shortcut to something. And if you then understand the value that you're creating, you can then have a better idea of what that would be worth, and be very careful and firm not to just try and price it and keep discounting to get customers. Because as soon as you've set a discounted price, that becomes the price. And so the piece I think is most fundamental is that people are not quite clear of what they're doing, what problem they're trying to solve for people, or being clear and simple about how they communicate it. And therefore they're trying to just price it based on bits of guesswork, or what they think would be a fair amount. And it's got to be flipped the other way around, of trying to understand the value you will either create for a business, or potential savings you could deliver, and not trying to be too scientific or arbitrary of saying I'm going to charge you 16% of what I save, because once you've delivered something, people will be they'll either bake that in, or they will not share the right information with you. And I think there's naturally a point of negotiation as well. And so being willing and ready to negotiate with people, but not trying to discount, but by offering a set of services, and then saying, if you can't quite afford it, I've got a base version where I can take some of these service elements off. So there may be something where you're doing something, you're then documenting it, you're then providing a report, and you'll say, well, I could do the work but not provide the report, and that's how I could discount it. So you're kind of offering options, but you're making sure that you're removing some elements of the value if you're reducing the cost. Now, as far as what that number should be, well, that's the symbolic $64,000 question. There's no one right answer, and in some respects, even though it sounds very trite to say, but the value is whatever someone is willing to pay for the services that you are going to offer. And you've got to try and often look for comparables. So if such a thing exists, what would a business be paying other like-minded people? And what are the credentials you have which shows that you should either be charged the same amount, or you may even be charging more because you are offering something unique and different. And I think the final bit I would say is that most people tend to undervalue themselves. So they feel guilty about saying a certain amount of money. Let's say that they're pricing something and saying, well, £1,000 seems quite a lot of money, or £2,000 or £500 or whatever the number is, and they've put themselves in completely the wrong position. They're almost negotiating with themselves to price down their service rather than coming up with reasons around why they should be charging at a premium rate. And it all comes back to what I said at the beginning of making sure you've got real clarity around what is the problem you're solving or the opportunity you're helping create. What are the credentials you bring to be able to be the right person to employ for that piece of work, and what is your methodology or approach, or the thing that makes it compelling and attractive that you can do something better than either a company can do themselves or their existing suppliers, or if they went out to try and find somebody else, that you're offering something different and unique. I will pause there because I may have raised some further questions or things you want to dig into, or to respond and say, actually, you have a different perspective or some other things to build on what I've said.
No, it's really good advice. Focusing on the value that you provide other people. One of the things, though, I often see two different extremes, as it were, when there's a lot of people that I know that either they reach a point in time where they're tired of corporate life and they go, I'm going to go and strike out on my own. And one of the common things is that they will go, okay, this is what I was earning in my corporate life, X thousand a year. And so in order for me to earn the same or more, a bit more, because I'm taking all the risk, right? In order for me to earn more, I want to earn this much divided by the number of hours that I'm willing to work, comes up with an hourly rate. And then they go and start selling themselves at that hourly rate, which is severely underpricing themselves, because what they don't take into account is the amount of time that they need to set aside for business development, funding the clients in the first place. Once you've found the client to pitch, it's then all of the pre-getting the work, the amount of investment that you've got to do to actually land the work in the first place. And then all of the admin work that you've got to do. When you're at a company, somebody else is dealing with the bills and the tax returns and the accountancy and everything else. So that's one extreme that I see, is that people severely underprice themselves when they come straight out of corporate life. Another mistake that I've seen that's quite common is somebody will go through the process that you've spoken about. This is the value. I've got some key skills, this kind of a thing. But they will still get fixated on this. This is what I am worth per hour. And then they believe and they state and they take the hard line of, this is what I'm worth per hour, regardless of what job I'm doing, which is another big mistake. So there was a guy that I know, that very good programmer, web developer, designer, that kind of a thing. And he was having a chat to me and saying, he's expanding his services. He's learning to do copywriting. And I go, oh, yeah. He goes, yeah, he's doing a course on copywriting and this kind of a thing. And I went, oh, we occasionally have a need for a copywriter. How much do you charge? And he goes, well, my hourly rate, it's X. And that was, what he would charge for. And I went, no, that's your web development price. What's your copywriting rate? And he went, no, but it's still me. That's still my skills, And I went, but it's not the same. I've got a friend who flies Boeings. He also flies drones. he doesn't charge the people that take him for his drone services the same hourly rate as he gets paid as a Boeing pilot. It's still him. He's not got any less skill when he's flying the drone than when he's flying the Boeing, but it's a different thing. And
It's
I
a really
think,
good point. I would also build and say not only do people need to think about the different pricing for the types of skills they're offering, but also for the different industries they're supporting. So, if someone was trying to do some copywriting for a local charity that's running on a shoestring, uh, I would be strongly urging them to charge a lower price than if they were working for a fully funded biotech startup, which is looking to go great guns, which will have a ton of money to spend, and actually the copy and the communication will be one of the key accelerators if it's good, and the key barriers if it's not good. And there's every other industry in between which would charge different amounts. So you have to look at not only the skills and how that works and operates, but the industry and organizations you are engaging and working with as well, and be mindful that it needs to be affordable for those organizations, but also competitive as well. And you may be able to create a portfolio, like a copywriting skill as an example, where you're doing some extremely highly paid work for certain organizations, and then at the other end of the spectrum, maybe pro bono or literally
yeah,
time and materials for another, like a local charity running on a shoestring for supporting a local hospice or a scout group or something of that nature. So it's having some sensitivity around how and who you're working with as well, I think.
yeah. And I think that is something that I see a lot of people trip up on. And I've had people say to me as well, how can X afford you to do that? And I go, well, because what I'm doing for them is completely different to what I'm doing for them, you know, and therefore my rate is very different of what I'm doing. And what we're doing for N0, we're giving up our own time. There is no cost. This is us paying it forward. So I think that people that are setting out along the path of entrepreneurship, and those who are initially looking to sell themselves, because that is often the start of the entrepreneurship journey. You start off selling your hours, and then when you scale, you start selling a service where other people are providing the hours and you're doing the management, etc., etc. And we can go into that in another discussion. But the most typical one is people are selling themselves in some form of a service, but they make the mistakes of not pricing, as you say, taking into account both the value that they provide and also the task that they're doing, and also who they're doing it for. Because all of those are going to factor in how much you charge or how much you get paid for a specific outcome.
I agree. And in fact, I'll throw one other lens, which I think every person who's embarking in this space should be thinking about very carefully, is the time it takes not only to do the specific task itself, but any preparation, any travel time, any post-event briefing or work time, etc. I can think of a couple of examples where I've given the same type of talk. One where I've done it online, I've prepared, so there's all the preparatory work. But when I gave the talk or the interview, as it turned out, but giving curated answers, that was contained within a period of time because people were coming into this call. They were very high paying clients. They were private equity firms who wanted this particular information. And when it had finished, there was no further work for me to do at that point. The same type of talk I've done where I've had to travel either to and from London or maybe even further to take documentation, be ready to give sort of run through and make sure the technicalities and the audio visuals and all this kind of stuff is working. Be there at least an hour or two before an event. Be ready for contingency if there was a problem, and then be ready to distribute afterwards and to stay around to answer questions from people and that kind of thing. But the organisers would still say, well, you came along to give a half hour, 40-minute talk, and that would be what they'd be expecting you to charge for. All the other stuff is different. So I think it's taking the full amount of time. And if you're trying to charge on an outcome basis, whatever time a prospective client is telling you they think something's going to take, be really careful about that, because they will not be looking at it from your perspective. You need to go away and think and say, what is the true cumulative total costs of this work in preparation, delivery, post activity, and then all the other elements you said as well around the invoicing, the submitting VAT if you needed to do that kind of thing. I think the other piece to consider on the pricing piece is when you're getting started with a new client, to test things out, make sure that both parties are happy. But the most important piece, once you've done all the work, is then ultimately getting paid. So don't try and do too much work for a client up front before you know that they're actually going to be a prompt and reliable payer. Otherwise, you will be spending an equal, if not greater amount of time trying to chase an invoice, getting stressed, thinking about it all the time, etc. Most people who've kind of embarked on this journey will have had at least one or two experiences in that domain.
Yeah, and that's definitely a topic for future conversation on what you should take into consideration when creating your first contract for a services agreement.
Yes, in fact, on that piece, on that final thing I'll say on that type of topic is also be mindful of what you are giving for free. Sometimes organisations will say, well, if you can come along and prepare a sort of deck or presentation or some slides or information, then we'll consider what we're doing, or put a proposal together for something. Have a healthy dose of cynicism and thinking they may be just using this to gather the informational requirements to then be able to either A, do all the work themselves, or B, pass on your information to their preferred supplier and say, this is what we're looking for. So think of if there's pre-work which is being asked for, which an organisation may not be wanting to charge for, just think if that's fair or appropriate or not. If you were getting an architect to come around to your house, you wouldn't expect them to do a whole set of drawings. You may get them to have a conversation, say what they could be possible, or make some very simple sketches, but beyond that, you'd be then paying for the work of preparing something and all the other activities around that domain. So think of what you are offering for free or as an enticement or as evidence that you have the capabilities to do something, and make sure that it can't just be extracted and your services are then no longer required.
That's really good advice, and I think we'll wrap it there.